What's going on, my fellow Jedi and Padawans? Welcome back to another Jedi gaming video. Thank you guys so much for coming back to the channel, and if you guys are new, welcome. Today we're going to be going over a separate Solar Warlock build for endgame besides that Starfire Protocol Well Fusion Grenade build that a lot of people use. This is an ultimate support build for taking it into endgame, utilizing some healing grenades as well as those exotic gauntlets Aeon Souls, so we can create a bunch of ammo in special and heavy for our fellow allies, so we can absolutely juice bosses and champions within that endgame content. So starting off right here for our abilities and subclass, we're going with Well of Radiance, of course, to keep everybody alive. Gives us that nice empowering and restoration while scorching enemies. So this is very good for that endgame, and you can't go wrong with a Well Warlock in endgame content. Most fire teams would like one. Now for our abilities, we're going with Healing Rift, Balance Glide, as well as our Incinerator Snap. This I think helps spread the most scorch to targets and deals that AoE, which I'm looking for with this build to help with that scorch spread, just because of some of the aspects and fragments. Now we're going to be using healing grenades on this build, which cures allies and grants restoration. So this is nice that the cure gives that healing right away, and restoration regen health and shield over time. So it's a nice little health buff to our fellow allies, and we can use it on ourselves. Now for our two aspects that we're going to be using, one is Icarus Dash, so we can quickly dodge while airborne. This helps keep us out of the damage of airborne stuff. We can dip and dodge behind pillars, everything like that, so it's a nice little escape inside of the PvE realm. Now on top of that, we're using Touch of Flame, so our healing grenades improved strength to that cure and restoration effect, so we have greater regen on health and shield, as well as that initial cure right away with the mending solar light. So for our first fragment that we're going to be using is Ember of Benevolence, so applying Restoration, Cure, or Radiant to allies, grant increased grenade, melee, and class restoration for a short duration. This is super easy to use because our healing grenade gives both restoration and cure, as well as our snap melee is going to grant radiant to allies and stuff. So we're going to be able to proc this very easily, allowing us to get our healing grenade back a little bit faster, as well as our melee and our class ability. Next off, we're going to be using Ember of Solace, so radiant and restoration effects applied have increased duration. This is nice for that radiant that we're getting from our healing grenade. It'll have that nice extended duration, helping keep us and our fellow guardians alive in that endgame content. Moving on to number 3, we're using Ember of Ashes, so applying the Scorch stacks more on targets. So with our Snap, we're going to be able to apply a lot more of those stacks of Scorch, which is nice because we're also using that powered melee attacks against combatants, make us and nearby allies radiant. So it's super nice for getting that little extra damage via radiant and being able to proc our other fragments as well. Now when we move on to weapons right here, we're going to be using the Ignition Code with blinding grenades, slide shot, and vorpal, so you can slide around all willy-nilly like using this basically consistently, because when you slide it'll reload. Blinding grenades is an S tier perk inside of the PvE realm for sure. Stuns all of those enemies for a good duration and lets them stay at bay, and then obviously that vorpal weapon so we can get that little extra damage. Now, I am going to craft this up to the enhanced perks, but right here we got Demo Incandescent on this bad boy, helping with that solar synergy for spreading Scorch, as well as Demolitionist when we get those defeats with Incandescent, and just the weapon in general, we're getting Demolition to proc, so we can get our healing grenade faster, allowing us to use that on ourselves, fellow ally guardians, as well as just getting that restoration cure to proc for that Ember of Benevolence to spam our abilities. And last but not least, we're using the Thunderlord right here, which is very good at DPS in my opinion with the Catalyst, and it has the intrinsic overload stun on champions, so we're going to be using that for champions and overload, as well as this is going to be our pulse rifle for anti-barriers. But just in general, this combination of weapons, very good for this build and supporting an ad clear as well as DPS. Moving on over here to our armor and mods, we're going to be using Grenade Launcher Finder as well as Harmonic Siphon and Elemental Armaments. So Harmonic Siphon, those final blows with matching damage to our subclass, help create Orbs of Power. So we're going to be able to create Orbs of Power to get back our super a little bit faster, as well as Elemental Armaments, so final blows with that same damage as our subclass. So both Harmonic Siphon and Elemental Armaments will proc together, dropping both Orbs of Power from Harmonic Siphon and then those Solar Elemental Wells from Elemental Armaments. Now bringing it to the Aeon Soul Exotic Gauntlets right here, using the Sec of Insight. We have 3 different options inside of the Aeon Gauntlets for each of our characters, depending on what you're going into. But personally, in Sect right here, in the Sect of Sight, is so much better than the rest, because when we use those finishers on elites, so those orange bars, we're getting special ammo, and when we use finishers on bosses or mini bosses, we generate heavy ammo for our fire team. So those count as champions, and those yellow bar enemies, whenever we finish them, we're creating that heavy ammo for everybody on the fire team. So it's very clutch for endgame and keeping that ammo economy up. Now on top of that, we're going to be using a second elemental armament, so when we do get those defeats with our BXR battler and that solar, we're going to create more of those solar elemental wells. We do have a bountiful wells on that allows us to stack these, so that is important to note, but we are going to create about 3 to 4 of these elemental wells when we get those defeats. On top of that, we're going to be using Focusing Strike, so we get class ability when we damage with our melee attack, just another facet of allowing us to chain our abilities back and forth with that anti-barrier pulse that I was talking about for our BXR battler. Now, when we move on to our chest piece, like I said, we have that bountiful wells on here, so it allows us to stack those 2 elemental armaments on our head and then our gauntlets. And then we're going to use concussive dampener, because like I said in a past video, endgame content seems to me like most of the time we're getting hit by some type of concussive dampener or some type of concussive shot instead of melee or sniper. There are those situations as well where they come in handy, but I think overall in Destiny, Guardians take more concussive dampening and concussive damage than anything else. Next up right here, very important for this build, we have recuperation as well as innervation. So replenish health every time we pick up Orbs of Power, and we get our grenade back a little bit faster every time we pick up Orbs of Power that we're creating via our super, our fellow Guardians are creating, or via Harmonic Siphon. So it's a nice chain of abilities as well as survivability for us, getting some of that health back. On top of that, we're utilizing Font of Wisdom so we can get our well back really fast by proccing Font of Wisdom. Gives us 100 intellect for a short period of time. Now we proc Font of Wisdom by picking up those solar elemental wells that we have on via elemental armaments on our headpiece as well as our arms. So very easy to get this to proc consistently inside of that endgame. And last but not least, for our armor and mods here, we're going weak and clear. So that nice Vorpal blinding ignition code can deal that weakening damage as well. So you can do some crazy DPS on enemies as well as seeking wells. So in that endgame content, you don't gotta go searching around for those elemental wells. You just gotta get close enough and then they track to you. And it is a pretty good distance that these things track. So very fun and useful build in the end game content. I know I've said this, and there will be changes coming with Lightfall and that sandbox and the meta, but these mods and builds will just get easier with how they're changing it for everybody, taking away the burns on armor sets, allowing you to do so much more customization and just easier in general for me to give you guys builds for y'all to use and just proc inside of Destiny instead of all these little intricate things that we have now with wells, orbs of power, everything like that. So hopefully y'all enjoy this build. My warlocks out there, take this in, support your fellow guardians and fire teams in that raid, in GM's endgame content. So I appreciate y'all support. I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.